Captain Lance here with the build guide for an Autobomber I've been working on. With this build, the goal was to make an Autobomber that not only could clear maps satisfyingly, but also do endgame content. Originally the plan was to be a full Autobomb, only dealing damage with the Heralds and Aberranth's hooves, but I found out after several deaths there were boss fights with ground effects that made doing donuts around a boss to deal damage an ineffective tactic. Because of this, I swapped in Stormbrand for my Herald of Thunder 6-link, and it feels the same mapping, but on boss opponents I drop Stormbrands and delete them for the most part. Now let's get into the building blocks of what makes this build work. I'm going to start with the key uniques to make the build work. The one big downfall of Herald skills is they have 0% base crit, which this build compensates for with the Shimmeron unique wand. This is the highest damage scaling wand in the game, as it grants flat damage, flat crit chance, crit multi, spell damage, and spell block to boot, with one downside: taking 200 lightning damage per second per power charge if you've dealt a critical strike recently. With 8 power charges, this build has an extreme damage scaling from the wands, but takes 3,200 damage per second. With 75 lightning res, it ends up being 800 damage per second, which is a significant downside. This problem is the reason why the highest damage wands in the game are a couple of chaos. This build solves it with a combination of the Soul Tether belt, the Arakali Pantheon, and the Barracks Grip ring. To start with, the Soul Tether gives us Overleech, which will apply to our ES as well once we reach full HP on leeching. Next up, the Life Leech is hard to come by for spellcasters, so we acquire it with Barracks Grip with Skitterbox constantly shocking enemies nearby, allowing us to get 1% damage leeched as life. Lastly, with the Arakali Pantheon, it gives us 50% increased life and DS recovery rate if we've stopped taking damage over time recently, which we can keep up at all times. This is done by swapping weapons back and forth whenever we feel we need the extra 50% more recovery sustain. This works because every time we press weapon swap, the lightning degen from the Shimmeron stops, thus proccing the stopped damage taking over time recently portion of the Arakali Pantheon. Speaking of our weapon swap, we just grabbed Griffon for the move speed and a shield with +2 minimum frenzy and endurance charge. This is just so whenever we swap weapons, we pick up a little speed and we grab permanent sustain on 2 endurance and frenzy charges for free. If you want an explanation on how this mechanic works, the last video I posted explains this method of sustaining extra charges for free. The last key unique of this build is the Aberranth's hooves. These boots grant Aberranth's Fury, which deals a small AoE damage every step we take. If we scale up some flat damage and put on all damage links in these boots, we can proc our heralds walking through mobs, leaving a path of destruction. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk right now because I'm sick and I keep coughing, but bear with me. For the rest of the gear pieces, these are not mandatory, just recommended routes for some higher end damage. For the helmet, I opted to go for a +1 max power charge Warlord helmet, Awakener Orb combined with the lightning damage spell from Hunter helmet. Of these two mods, the power charge is far and away more important for damage. If you have to choose, a Stormbrand pen enchant would be stronger for the single target, or Herald of Ice mana reservation for quality of life. You'll see on my helmet I grabbed Herald of Thunder reservation. This is when I was having Herald of Thunder in a 6-link and I really needed to reduce the amount of mana it was reserving, but since I'm now switched to a Stormbrand, this is no longer necessary. For our amulet, I went with Choir of the Storm. This is just for fun. More lightning bolts raining down from the sky, plus good lightning damage and crit chance. With our second ring, we went with the Herald of Thunder ring, lightning damage ring. This is probably one of the first things I'd swap out, given later in the build I swapped in, Stormbrand, that I was talking about earlier. I no longer need the reduced mana reservation for Herald of Thunder. Lastly, for our gloves, we went with damage while leeching craft, plus incursion, shield damage mod, plus life. We did a Warlord slam for 30 spell damage. I wouldn't really expect to get gloves these good, but this is just something you can keep continuing to scale for if you keep putting more money into your build. Lastly, for flasks, I would recommend a quartz flask for phasing while mapping, a diamond flask is huge to cap crit, and a quicksilver for speed. On my build, I used Puddle Faith initially for getting more crit for Herald of Thunder, but considering we have 6.8 additional base crits from our Shimmeron Wands and Assassin, you really do not need this at all. You hit crit camp easily without it, so I'd recommend grabbing either another defensive flask or a different offensive flask. Now I'm going to go into gems and links and the passive tree. Alright, I'm going to get into gem links and then the passive tree. To start off with, we're going to look at our links in the Abraths. To start off with, you want added lightning damage support, awakens unnecessary. At the end of the day, your single target's going to be your Stormbrand and your chest. You'll still pop packs regardless. Next up is control destruction. We hit crit crap even with the reduced crit chance. These are very strong support. Energy leech support is pretty much mandatory in all of our damage links because we leech to full life or full energy shield, and then we have overleech, so we get both the mods from this energy leech support, I believe, which makes it like a crazy 60% damage more multiplier, and the leech percentage is also nice as well. Last up, we have inspiration support. You could do multiple different things. I just ended up getting a red link at the end here, and I went with inspiration. And I generate charges by throwing my smoke mines around. So basically, while I'm mapping, I'll be throwing those a lot. I'll keep that. I'll keep the inspiration charges up with that. So you have inspiration here, smoke mine, phase run. This is our other part of the wand setup. It's basically just for running around, mapping. We activate all those things. Gives us a decent movement speed for running through packs, exploding things. And the smoke mine blinds enemies, and it's a nice little movement skill. Next up is our helmet. This is our Herald of Ice. We have Innervate, Herald of Ice, Energy Leech, Power Charge on crit. The reason for Power Charge on crit, not a higher damage multiplier, is it's a 1.1 multiplier for the amount of reservation. So when you're linking up something that reserves mana, you want to kind of keep it lower. So Power Charge on crit is decent damage while also not making the reservation much more. We also have Innervation to just grab that extra lightning damage for all of our other skills if we killed something recently. And Energy Leech support is just nice again when you pop an entire pack to get a whole bunch of leech stacks. And it's a good damage multiplier. Our other wand is a cast when damage taken setup. It procs Assassin's Mark and Wave of Conviction. This is just nice for getting some extra damage on bosses. They hit you, they get hit with Wave of Conviction for minus lightning res, and Assassin's Mark for extra damage taken from crits. Next up is our Herald of Thunders linked to Onslaught. Basically, this means we pretty much always have Onslaught up when we're mapping, and our Herald of Thunder still ends up popping the Herald of Ice too, because it still hits pretty hard. Next we have a level 1 Precision. This is just for the 40% crit chance and having a Watcher's Eye with the 50% multiplier, or 50%, yeah, the crit multi more or less. Skitterbots, this is to constantly have chilled and shock enemies. This works with our Barracks Grip to give us the 1% damage leech. Lastly is our 6th link. I literally used to have a Herald of Thunder in here, and that's why I have the Herald of Thunder reservation gear, but it didn't really work for bossing. When bosses would throw down a degen, like right where you're running in circles around them, you would just end up dying, or you couldn't really do damage to them, so ended up having to swap in Stormbrand just to drop a couple on a boss and just run around aimlessly and let the bosses die. So Stormbrand's linked to Ellie Focus, Empower, Inspiration, Awaken Lightning Pen, and Energy Leech. The only ones of these I would keep are Energy Leech and Ellie Focus. Inspiration's also good. Empower was pretty much, I just had a chest with 2 reds, and so I had to use another red. You probably would end up wanting something like Control Destruction instead of this. And that is the links for the main damage setup. Now let's go into gears and passive, or just passive tree. I'll start off with the Ascendancy. I went for the Assassin Ascendancy, grabbing first Unstable Infusion for power charge generation, +1 max power charge, then Deadly Infusion for the base crit, the crit multi, the movement speed. Next up I grabbed Elusive for some damage reduction, some movement speed, and then Opportunistic for the movement speed. The damage from crits can't be reflected, doesn't really matter, and the 20% more damage against basically unique or rare enemies. Also on the passive tree, this is what ends up coming around to. I pretty much am only grabbing life, flat lightning damage, crit, increased lightning damage, the power charge wheels, the power charges all over the tree, the minion damage node, because I have minion damage here and minion damage on my helmet, and trying to think if there's anything special. Here's what kind of a gem I'd look for. I ended up basically, the 2 rare gems I have, I was pretty much correcting some resistances and some strength dex requirement. Because I had an astral plate, I needed to grab strength and dex for it. This is not 100% necessary. This is just a chess piece I crafted and I worked it into the build. You can really kind of work in any rare with life and resistances. The spell crit is not really necessary and it doesn't add too much to the build. And the last key feature I should probably talk about is this jewel. Because we're using the Soul Tether belt, which overleaches our energy shield, this works perfectly with Glorious Vanity, which grants us 20% of our life as ES. So we have no ES gear, but because we have 4k life and we have this keystone here plus the Soul Tether, we get 25% of that as ES. So that's basically like 1,000 ES. And then there's a few hybrid nodes we grabbed on the tree that gave us increased energy shield, which ends up getting us to about 2k energy shield. So you'll see when you're mapping, you'll overleach all the way up to 6k EHP. It's pretty good sustain and it works out real well for defensive sustain and staying alive in most things and be able to take some decent hits. The last gem links I should mention are our shield charge. Since we weapon swap a lot to sustain frenzy and endurance charges or proc our Carly's Pantheon, a lot of times we like to just get a fortify off. So we have shield charge, fortify faster attacks. So say we're in a big fight and we're worried about some big hits coming in, we swap in, get a shield charge on, get fortify up for 4 seconds, swap back to doing damage. So it's an easy way to keep an extra 20% damage reduction in the build. That is the gist of the gear and the passives. This is what the tree looks like. I will post a path of building so you can pull that up, and I might link the character page as well. So that's the gist of the build. I hope you guys like it. Feel free to try it out. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer it. You guys have a good one.